Welcome to DOU and the Worldview with Jay Cohen. Here is Mr. Jay Cohen, everybody. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So one of the topics that I wanted to talk about offhand is basically the banking crisis that's come up. I mean, it was developing for a while. Too many bad investments, I think, on their end, to say the least. So now you have SVP basically going down. You have Signature going down. And I hear to a lesser extent that Wells Fargo is in trouble. So what's going on and what should change with this? And should we be bailing out these banks?
I think the bigger question is not so much just the banking industry, right? But we are at a point in society where we are near the end of capitalism, right? Okay. Greed has taken over. You know, it used to be the people who ran banks had sort of a reverence over that money because they knew it was not their money, right? And over the last 20, 30 years, that doesn't seem to be the case, right? Because we have had, Wells Fargo has had problems for years, right? They had problems where they were setting up accounts for people, not even telling people. And so from what I understand with the SVB bank is that they were throwing parties, they had jets, they were doing all sorts of shady stuff with that money.
Right.
And here's my problem with where we're at, though, is that there's no accountability. Right. What I think Biden has done with this banking crisis is that he said the investors, too bad. You invested, investments are a risky business, you're not getting refunded.
Right.
And where in 2008, they refunded the investors when the banking crisis hit then, right?
Okay.
So I think that's where a difference where we're at right now. But I think somebody needs to go into these banks and get hold of these officers, arrest them, and put them in jail because they're frauding people, right? If you want to take, and if you're a bank and you're taking on a risky investment, hey, sorry, you don't get to run that bank. You don't get a $35 million payout. You don't get all the tasks that you think you're entitled to because you run a bank. And I think that's kind of where we need to start looking, is that everybody needs to start being held accountable. When we had the stock market crash and was it Lehman Brothers went out of business? Did anyone go to jail? Right?
Right.
When all these people were losing their homes because of these bad mortgages.
Oh yeah.
Did anyone go to jail? Did anyone lose a job? Did anyone really suffer from the bad decisions that they were making? And there's a problem with that.
Yeah, because I mean, you had Lehman Brothers and you had Bear Stearns that went down in that too.
Yeah.
In that same one. So now let me ask you something, because you said something there about capitalism coming to an end. What would replace that? I'm a viewer looking at this now, like, okay, what is he talking about? What is going to come behind capitalism? And I love capitalism. So
that's the question, right?
Socialism? Is there going to be some other government form of banking? I mean,
well, you and I grew up, the entire time we've been living, we've lived under a capitalistic society, right?
Correct.
And so we don't really know what it's like not to live in a capitalistic society. And I don't know what the answer is after that. But here's what I think really needs to happen is we need to start holding people accountable. And I think once we start holding these people accountable, then maybe things will start changing, right? People won't be as greedy. They won't make such risky investments. I mean, we put Martha Stewart in jail.
Yes.
Right? We held her accountable.
Yes, we did.
But then bigger crimes, are we holding anybody accountable? And it's not just in business, it's across the board, right?
Oh, absolutely. And
Politicians that are on the take, politicians that have been part of, maybe an insurrection. We don't know, because nobody's prosecuting those people. Nobody is rounding these people up and saying, we need to know what your involvement was,
right,
And until we start holding people accountable again, and the thing is, what's crazy is you mess up on your job, I mess up on my job, we lose our job. Just
right,
like no questions asked. Hey, we don't want you anymore. Get the hell out of here.
right.
But what about at the top when they're not doing their job? And I was once told by a recruiter, everybody must rise to the level of their incompetency in business,
Right.
right?
That's a hell of a statement. Yeah.
So, but it's true, right?
Right.
And we have people who are running companies who are doing shady stuff. They're taking major risks with companies, and they don't care, because at the end of the day, they still get this huge payout, whether or not the business fails or not. And gee, I wish I could do that. Wouldn't you like to get a job, get $35 million a year, and say you work there for 10 years, and do that you just have it fail? I mean, look at Twitter right now, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
Anybody with money can buy a company. Doesn't mean you know how to run a company.
oh, I agree 1000% with that. Here's my problem. It's like, it's not just the accountability, it's the competency of the person that they're bringing in, and I think that's where you kind of hinting at. But I think on paper, a lot of these folks that they bring in to run these companies, they have a great resume. The problem is, it's not proven, you know.
Right.
And when they get into these positions like that, and you notice you have a golden parachute, it's like, well, I'm going to take advantage of this one way, shape, or form. And sometimes it's not always them, it's those outside influences compounding on them to do certain things, with regulation or lack thereof, and lack of fiduciary responsibility, and so forth.
Except they're the ones that are pushing for less and less regulation, right? If you look at what happened with the train incidents in New Palestine, we had regulations. Obama put regulations in that they needed better brakes. And then Trump rolled the regulations back, but Trump didn't do it on his own. He was lobbied by the railway industry,
mm-hmm.
Norfolk Southern.
Right.
It specifically lobbied to not have to put in those brakes.
Gotcha.
Right. So what we're seeing is that, regulations go to the banking industry. If, again, Trump rolled back banking regulations, right?
Right.
And they say now, had they not done that, we wouldn't have had the problem we had with Silicon Bank and Signature and Wells Fargo right now, because we would have had those regulations in place, right?
Right.
So you're seeing that the greed of these large companies are like, oh, we don't want to put in brakes. We don't really care what happens. And look at the fallout of what happened in New Palestine, is that from that explosion of those chemicals, they're taking bottles of water off shelves in New Jersey.
My goodness.
Because they're tainted from
Right.
that chemical. We're going to be breathing that for years to come, right? We're going to have acid rain. Who was the one who made the decision to explode that thing and burn it off? Like, was there not a better way? But see, these people, they don't care, right? They're so out of touch with reality, they don't care. They're making their money, and they're like, hey, who cares? And what I've said for a long time is costs of services have gone up so dramatically, right? 30 years ago, we didn't need a cell phone. We didn't need internet, right? We didn't need all that stuff to get by. And today, if you don't have a cell phone, you don't have internet, you can't do a lot. You can't do your job. You can't do a lot of things, right?
Exactly.
And yet, they're charging astronomical rates for your cell phone, for internet, right? I pay $200 a month for internet to make sure I've got a good connection, because I do work from home. I pay about $200 for cellular on my phone to make sure I've got a good cellular plan.
Correct.
And who do they think can really afford this? How is it sustainable? Because you're not increasing wages for people,
No.
right? So people have less and less expendable cash. So they're going to start getting those services less and less. So who do these people think that they're actually selling to? Because sooner or later, we're not going to be able to sustain where we're at right now, and everything's going to collapse.
Yeah.
And they don't care.
No, they don't. I mean, it's
And-
all about profit and numbers.
Right.
And investors, because they always want to make more revenue for the investors and so forth. Here's my problem. It's like, do you make internet, do you make cellular service a utility as opposed to having it in the free market then, to have price controls and so forth? Would we be going down that road, and how dangerous would that really be if it did?
Well, I'm not an economist, so I don't know. But
Right.
I mean, it's a good point, right? Like the problem though is we keep getting taxed higher and higher. You ever look at your cell phone bill and see all the different taxes they tax you on?
Oh,
And they're just like BS taxes, right?
yes.
Like, and you know this as well as I do with your background in IT, right? They build the infrastructure.
Right.
How much does it really cost to keep it up? Because they're not investing in new infrastructure, and they should.
Yes.
So what is it that we're really paying for? How much does it really cost from us to go from one cell to another? Right? Years ago, we used to get charged for roaming fees, right? And they stopped that because it was like, who cares, right?
Yeah.
Signals traveling, who cares?
Exactly.
But and somebody brought up a point to me the other day, which I thought was really great. The cell phone industry was created through tax dollars.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of things we have today that were created through tax dollars that we're now we're paying an exorbitant amount to use those technologies that they didn't put the money, they didn't do the risk to build these technologies, right?
Correct.
Why are we not getting a break on it? Why aren't we seeing lower rates? You know, like a good example is gas, right? The gas industry gets like $10 billion a year in payouts from the government,
Correct.
subsidies, and
Yeah.
yet we still pay exorbitant amounts at the pump, and that goes up. Have you noticed lately? And I know it hasn't been this volatile in the past. Is that it can go up and down 20, 30 cents a day. One day it's up, one day it's down. But here's the thing: we buy a barrel for a certain amount.
Mm-hmm.
They refine it, and then we get it at the pump, right?
Right.
Why is it that their speculative price at a barrel is what we pay at the pump? Because when they take that barrel, let's say they buy the barrel for, $5. I know it's more than that, but let's just say $5.
Right.
And then it gets to us and whatever. So whatever we're paying at the pump, we're paying for that $5 barrel.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if tomorrow that barrel is now $10, they increase at the pump and we're paying $10 for that $5 barrel.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know exactly.
I'm like, and they're turning record profits, still getting subsidies and still charging us an arm and a leg at the pump. So where is it that we can figure out all these fixes to get to where we work better together as a society? And until we cut out corporate greed, and I'm not one to say, CEOs need to cap their pay.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But on the other hand, how many CEOs need to make $35 million a year every year?
Exactly.
How much money do you really need, especially if you're not paying it downward to your employees, right?
Exactly.
There have been recently some CEOs that have raised everyone else's pay and they took less of their own pay. I think Costco was one of those. Their CEO only makes like
Still phenomenal.
$7,000.
I mean, because look how much money they have as in terms of stocks and some of their other parachute outs and so forth. So even if they took their pay down to $1, they're not hurting at all.
Well,
Yeah,
and that's the thing. None of these companies would be hurting, right? If they were offering better pay to their employees. But
right.
you and I see this every single day with what we do, right? They just keep wanting to pay less and less and less and want you to do more and more and more.
Oh, absolutely.
And they don't care.
I think they take advantage, especially in this environment. There's so much gig work that's going on between all of the stores. It's not just a Walmart, it's not just a Costco or any of the retailers. There are other places too where they take advantage of gig work and contract work because obviously you don't have to pay the benefits to them. They feel like they're giving you the top side pay because if we were paying an employee the same thing,
Well,
they
and that's like everything we saw in the Northern Virginia area, right? Where you
right,
pretty much couldn't be an employee anywhere. You always had to be a contractor of someone, right? If you worked in the IT industry, you're always on some contract somewhere doing contract work
right,
instead of being an actual employee, right? And
exactly.
and that's ridiculous. You know, when we were kids, businesses used to look at their employees as assets.
Right,
And if it could keep you for years and years and years, you had foundational knowledge of the company, the products, the services, the clients that was invaluable to a company. And
right,
those business owners were like, you know what, Carl, you and your family are so important. We're going to make sure you have health care. We're going to make sure you have a pension plan. We're going to make sure we take care of you
exactly.
because we want you to stay here. Then we got to a point where we don't care. Go elsewhere. Go find something else. I'm not even going to train you anymore because if I train you, you're going to take that training, you're going to go elsewhere and get paid more.
Exactly.
I don't want to train you anymore. So now you have to pay for your own training, which is all ridiculous,
That's,
right?
yeah,
One of my
oh,
one
go
of one of my downfalls in business has been I've always worked and I never kept up with training. I would learn on the job. I would teach myself all new things, right?
right,
And everyone's like, hey, do you have a certification in that? No, I've been doing the job.
right.
Well, if you don't have a certification, we don't want to talk to you. Okay. Because people can get certification and still not know what the hell they're doing.
Paper.
It's
Yeah,
it not that I'm against certification, but employers never wanted to pay me to get certified. They never wanted to pay me to get trained. But I kept doing the job and I kept doing more and more and I kept moving up the ladder and I kept moving on in my career. And now we have non-technical managers who are trying to hire technical people and they have no clue how to do that. So they're like, hey, let's see your certifications. Not going to tell you anything. When I started in the IT industry, they said, there's your server, go work on it. I'm like, manuals? And they laughed at me. Manuals? Are you kidding me?
I had a similar story.
Right. So we had to figure everything out. We had to figure out how computers connected together with TCP/IP. We didn't have DHCP at the time where it would self-assign an IP for you.
Exactly. There
We
was
had
a reason why we had to learn what subnetting was and had to go ahead and set up our own networks and had to know where that server was in conjunction to this organizational unit and so forth. I mean, look, I learned programming because I was watching I guess it was public television, and it was in Maryland. And I remember specifically they had a show on Berkeley units, and I wanted that book. I was like, oh, that's how you program the computers. So I remember going to the library. This was in Washington, D.C. So it was a library that was on Oklahoma Avenue in D.C., close to the Langston Golf Course, a black golf course. And I remember asking for a book on Berkeley units. The librarian, she had her glasses. She turned her glasses down. She looked at me. She was like, son, if you see anything back there that says Unix, just bring me the card. I'll tear it up. You can have it. I'm sure you're the only person that's going to be asking for a Unix book in this neighborhood. So I got that. And I just studied it like it was nobody's business. My brother had acquired me a computer. I'm not even going to say how the hell he got it, but he bought me a computer and it had the frame and it had all of the terminals just like Unix. And I was like, this is a Unix computer. Oh, wow. So I just started programming. And then it developed from there. And I remember going to UDC, University of District of Columbia, learned how to solder, learn how to put together motherboards. I mean, I learned everything from scratch going forward.
Right.
You know? And I was ahead of the internet in a way because I had purchased a domain name before anybody knew what that was.
Right.
That's how I was able to get my name. And I had to learn HTML, programming, XML, Java, and so forth, just so I knew how to do it. But see, I learned from scratch. And then when they said they had certifications for it, I was like, I don't need to study this. I've been doing this for years. I walked in there and I passed those certification tests because when I was in college, the funny part about it was I had this professor that said, okay, if you pass the Network Plus test, you'll get an A out of this class. I walked right in there, needed 738, got 738, I passed it, he had to give me an A. But the thing of it was a different type of learning that you did. It was like you had this blue collar mentality in a white collar industry, and they don't have that now. And you said something that was loaded just in one word, accountability. Nobody wants to be accountable anymore. They don't want somebody like you to have experience without certs to say, oh, well, we hired this one because he has every cert on earth and so forth. Well, we expect him to do the job well, but then this one that has 20 some years plus experience, we're not sure if he could do the job, even though he's been doing it for a while. I was like, what sense does that make?
Right.
You know, because they don't want to be accountable for something that they can't prove.
Well, and they don't want you to learn on the job, right? I'm like, I've always figured out everything, right? I will ramp up quickly. And when you say that, they say, ramp up? What do you mean? It's like, well, I don't know, but I will make sure I know it within a week. No, they don't want to pay you for that week.
Exactly.
And I'm like, it's short-sightedness on everybody's part, right?
Right.
The thing is, we've gotten to a way today where you buy a computer and it sets up like that, right?
Correct.
It seeks the internet out for you. You don't have to do a thing about TCP/IP or routers or hubs or anything because it all happens automatically. But on a corporate level, when you're going into a business, you still have to know because you're setting up a large network, 100 different PCs. What if there's a conflict in an IP somewhere, right? Which there could be, right? If you have to assign every server has to have a static IP address.
Correct.
That changing all the time. So how do you know if you're assigning the right IPs? Are you mapping it out? These are things that, it's funny when I work with small businesses, inevitably it's always, oh, my brother-in-law knows computers and he takes care of our IT. Right. Or my son was really good at computers his whole life. And so now now he's in charge of my network.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't know what happens if things are done wrong. And they don't understand how the network will slow down if you haven't mapped out the IPs in the right tree fashion.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So, I've seen networks where I love doing a trace route on networks because you can see where things are going in like a loop before they get out of the company. And it's like, no, there should be a direct line out.
Exactly.
Oh, no, because they keep adding segments over time and nobody knows how to map that out correctly. It's ridiculous.
And their nomenclature for some of those nodes and servers is like, what the hell? You worried the British about to come in or something? I mean, it's like, how are you naming some of these segments and so forth? It's like, no wonder nobody could find anything because, I mean, it's a detailed process, but it's more of a detailed process from the beginning. Just like if I have to set up a database, let's get the nomenclature correct before you even get started on building anything.
Right.
Because you're going to run to a point where, okay, Z is what? What is X? What is T? And so forth. And if you don't have that already defined and you have to make it up as you go, you get stuff like that that's out there with a lot of industries now.
Right.
You know? And a lot of their build going forward, and sorry, folks, we didn't mean to make this an IT program, but you watched us, so you're going to have to, deal with this a little bit. So, you take that and you apply it to how that company is run. That tells you a lot about who's running that company. If they allow their IT to be set up in that way, that says a lot about how they conduct business as well.
Well, but so no real fault of the CEOs or the COOs. They've been told over years, outsource, right?
Right.
They outsource their IT department. And they do that because they have no clue what IT is.
Right.
And they don't understand what really needs to happen. Are they secure? It's funny because I talk to a lot of small companies and I'm like, how's your IT department? They're like, oh, it's great. Okay, why is it great? Well, because we're never down. Okay, what if you are down? Well, what do you mean? If there's a problem, who do you call? Well, we don't know. Okay. What happens if you find out a hard drive died and it had all the very important information? Do you have a backup? I assume we do. Have you tested your backup? Because you know how many times I've seen backups fail because nobody's tested it, and at some point the backup stopped backing up and nobody knew.
Exactly.
I worked for Fannie Mae. True story. Worked for Fannie Mae. They did an upgrade on a server, and the developers thought everything was getting backed up, and there was one file, a control file they needed for an application. Wasn't there.
Right.
Okay, let's bring it back from backup. They went back over a year and still could not find that file.
Wow.
On no backups. So somebody had to sit down and recreate that file from scratch, which cost time and money.
So they did no differential backups. They did no full backups, because if they did a full one every so often, they would have had that file there.
Right.
You see, I mean,
Right.
It's stuff like that people don't think of with IT. They always think about IT when something goes wrong, but they never really think about it when things go right, because then they assume they're overpaid. Especially when you're talking about security. It's like, okay, like with the Y2K thing, they're like, oh, nothing happened. Well, nothing happened because a lot of people was working on it to make sure nothing did happen. And that's what you pay for. It's like insurance. It's like, well, why do I have insurance on a house? Well, nothing ever is going to happen to my house. But then if something does, you want to make sure you can build a new one or repair the one that you have, right?
Or
That's
your
what
car.
IT does.
Exactly. Or your car. Same difference. But nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. They think it's going to happen to you or the guy down the street or their brother-in-law. They don't think it's going to happen to them ever.
If you have any assets, you need to protect them. And if you're in business and have assets, you really need to protect them. So,
right. And right now, there are 187,000 cyber attacks every hour.
yes.
Every hour of every day. 187,000 attacks. If they're not attacking you today, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I mean, people don't understand. It can come through your email. Some employee, if they have rights to their computer, they can download a file and play, thinking they having some music or some video or whatever. They put in a virus right on their system,
Right.
And they have no clue.
So let's bring this back to your original point.
Absolutely.
And that is accountability for everything, right?
Right.
We need better accountability in business. that goes the entire everything in business, right?
Mhm.
From IT to retail to how we manufacture products, right?
Right.
We had a baby supply shortage a few months ago, and it was because, again, there's only 3 baby formula suppliers,
Right.
only 3, right?
Right.
And one of them said, we don't have to worry about that plant. We don't have to upgrade it. We don't have to do anything to it, right?
Right.
Greed. They didn't want to spend the money. Greed. And then what happened? That plant had a problem. And that created a huge backlash through the industry. Same thing when the largest meat supplier got hit with ransomware, caused a problem throughout the world. And why? Because there's 3 major meat suppliers in the world. And it's like, why do we allow this? In a free market, free society, in a capitalistic society, there should be hundreds of suppliers,
Oh, absolutely.
not just 3. But why do we allow that? Why are we not encouraging more? Why do we let all these big companies buy up all these other small companies so that there are no more? We used to have antitrust laws, right?
Right.
You couldn't own a monopoly. Well, I'm sorry, but if there's only 3 in the entire world, that's kind of a monopoly.
It is.
So why are we not holding them accountable? Why are we holding these CEOs accountable? Why is the CEO of Norfolk Southern still the CEO after what he did? And there were like 3, 4 other derailments in Ohio by the same company since the
Wow.
new Palestine crash. Like,
Yeah. That's
okay,
absolutely. Yeah.
why is he still the CEO? And it's funny because when you listen to all the news and all the conservatives are pushing to impeach the transportation secretary, the secretary of transportation.
Buttigieg.
Why? He wasn't the one that made these decisions for Norfolk Southern, right?
Right.
Why aren't we holding him accountable? And that's the thing, accountability. You screw up as a CEO, you lose your job. Plain and simple.
So
If Elon Musk should
Mhm.
be ousted from Twitter because
Why is that? Why would you say?
he's running it into the ground. Twitter used to be a really good, successful tool for businesses to market on, to post articles about their businesses or the industry or whatever going on. And now it's kind of trash because he's just allowed all this crap on there. And you can't even make fun of Elon Musk without getting banned.
Hmm.
I mean,
Well, let's expound on that. What trash, is he letting on there? Let the people know what trash is coming on there.
okay, you really want to get into it?
Let's get into it.
So right after he took over and he started relaxing all the rules, the N-word, the use of the N-word went up by 600%.
My goodness. Okay. And see, I'm on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter that much. So I don't know.
I don't use it that much either, but I've listened to interviews from employees that he locked out all the employees from their key fobs.
I've heard that. Yeah.
He locked himself out.
He locked himself out.
So he had to call a guy he just fired to come figure out how to get him back in the building.
Wow. Interesting.
Here's the thing. I've never been a big Elon Musk fan, and that's fine. Not everybody likes me. Not everybody likes you, Carl, right?
Of course.
So I've never been a big Elon Musk fan. Here's what I will tell you about Elon Musk. He didn't create money. He wasn't born a poor guy and just said, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make money. His family made money off blood diamonds and emeralds in apartheid South Africa.
Okay.
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 He had tons of money to start with. Then he made money in PayPal's and left that. But he did not create Tesla. Tesla was created by someone else. He bought out Tesla and named himself as the founder.
Wow.
And he's not the genius behind it. See, when you have money, you can hire very smart people.
Absolutely.
They're the ones that need to be celebrated at Tesla. He's not the one who created, man, my mind is blanking now, SpaceX.
SpaceX, yeah.
That's all funded through grants from the federal government,
I was about to say it's the government.
money from the federal government. He has not put any money into that. But, oh, it's SpaceX, it's Elon Musk's, right?
Right.
He has figured out a way to play the system. But when you look at what he actually does, what he says, how he acts, he's really not a bright guy.
Wow.
And so
You're really digging in on him, Musk. Okay.
you want me to be honest, right?
Yeah. And I'm going to be honest too. Go for it.
So that's, when you look at what's going on at Twitter, he has no clue how to run Twitter.
Okay.
And, Twitter was a great creation and should have just been left alone. I understand everybody is worried about,
Free speech and so forth.
right, free speech, First Amendment rights. But First Amendment does not apply to my servers.
Okay.
If I am paying for my computer servers, I decide who goes on that.
Right.
And if I set up a bunch of rules, but it can't be arbitrary, right? I can't say, no, Carl can't be on here and somebody else can. But if I set up a rules and say, these are the acceptable policies, that's what sticks on my server.
Okay.
And I have the right to kick anyone off that because it's my investment in my company. So that has nothing to do with free speech. But by saying, oh, you need to have free speech for everything. Yeah, there are people speaking very freely on that. Misinformation, really egregious stuff, a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of racism, and it's not needed. It's not needed in our society. It's not needed on Twitter, especially when Twitter made their money off ad revenue.
Okay.
I'm not putting any ads on Twitter anymore. No way.
So now,
I don't want to be associated with the people that are now controlling Twitter. And when I say controlling, I mean the majority of the people that are on there. First of all, they're not business owners. They are everyday people who are saying just how much they hate the world. And there's no need for that.
I understand. But when you're talking about, and I'm gonna challenge you a little bit on it because with Twitter, they felt like it was the other way around. The ones that you're talking about that's coming out, let's just say conservatives have come through on Twitter, and they felt like it was an unfair balance of them being blocked versus, liberals being blocked. And I know this is a subject we want to get into a little bit later, but like the LGBTQ community and so forth, they felt like they had some indoctrinating style tweets, and you can expound upon that and so forth. And they felt like, all right, this is getting out of hand the other way. So we need to bring this back to the middle where it's like, hold up, you can't just be saying all of this stuff about kids. And I'm not saying that I've seen all of these tweets, but this is some of the arguments that I've been hearing.
Right.
And then, all right, if such and such is talking about a particular community in a non-defaming way, why am I being blocked if we can't have the discussion about it? So your retort to that.
Well, I think everything has to have boundaries, right?
Right.
Side, make it fair, but I also know that there are a lot of people making statements with no facts.
Right.
So, hey, great, you were banned. Why? Because a lot of the people that get banned will never tell you why. They will never give you the exact reason. They'll just say, oh, because you don't like who I am.
Okay.
What is it you actually said?
Right.
Was it misinformation? Was it hate speech? Was it go through the list? And then, oh, by the way, gee, Carl, we're sorry, we got it wrong. We did flag your account, but you know what? We went back, we looked at it again, and you're right, we had it wrong. And that happens all the time on a lot of social media companies, right? It happens with Facebook, it happens with TikTok,
Right.
and it even happens with Twitter to some extent. But there has to be rules, right?
Yeah.
But you can't. We don't live in a Wild West. You can't just have no rules, right? Even with free speech, you can't run into a movie theater and scream fire if there's no fire. That's not protected speech, right? And the
Correct.
same thing with anything in a social setting, right? So on social media and in person, right? You can't go running down the street that,
Yeah.
there are monsters coming or whatever. There is an acceptable behavior that we have to live in to be a civilized country. And we need to pull that back.
Okay.
But there is a lot of accusations that I'm just seeing across the board that have no facts. And I'm like, okay, so what's your fact? Give me your fact.
Right.
And they're like, just Google it. You go figure it out. No, I'm not doing your research.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If I know that what you're telling me is not factual, and you say, oh, go Google it. No, you Google it, because honestly, what you're saying is wrong. That's where we need to get to.
Understood.
But the problem is, here's the real problem in our society.
Yeah.
Everybody is working so hard. They don't have the time to research everything. So maybe they shouldn't comment.
Yes.
Maybe they just shouldn't comment.
Right.
Maybe they should say, you know what? I need to sit this one out because I don't know that much. I mean, you can give your opinion like I'm giving you now.
Right.
Right. But if somebody says, well, give me the proof, show me that you were banned because you were Black, or give me a proof that you were banned because you said something hateful, or give me the proof, right? Tell me it's not because you're a conservative. Maybe you aren't, maybe you're not, but that's probably not why you're being banned. You're probably being banned because you said something really egregious.
Okay.
I'm guessing, because it hasn't happened to me. But you know what?
Right.
I don't see egregious things.
Understood. So, now to clarify about Elon Musk, I don't necessarily consider him a dumb guy, somebody that could be, a multi-billionaire and figure out how to get up there. Yes, he may have had his family, I don't know his entire background, but, he seemed to be able to get up there to the top, and there's some innovations that he's done as well. Nobody's going to be a perfect person or whatever, but I'm not going to I'm kind of looking from afar. Maybe I need to look into it more. I need to do the Cohen Research Society and take a look and see what's going on over there at Twitter and so forth. But
or maybe you make a better politician than I would.
and see, that's the thing. I mean, I don't necessarily dig into the left. I don't dig into the right. I'm literally like old school America, right down the center and so forth. It's like you have to show me where certain things are going off the rails at for me to acknowledge it, because I do feel like sometimes people watch the news and they'll watch one source of news and you hear every bullet point from that station. It could be Fox, it could be CNN, it could be MSNBC, it could be insert Newsmax or whatever they get their news from, and they will in order tell you everything that they've said on that show without even doing research. And even more importantly, it's stuff that doesn't really affect them directly. Like with LGBTQ, we've had this conversation off camera. I mean, nothing they do affects my life. So why should I really go out of the way and worry about all of the other stuff the media is trying to say about them positively or negatively if it doesn't really affect my life? So you saying that's one of those groups that's, I forgot the term that you used,
Marginalized?
marginalized groups, just like Jews. And let's get into that a little bit. How much of this hate has really drummed up ever since really the pandemic? Because I'm hearing a lot more talk about it now than I've ever heard before. So what's happening?
Well, it's on the rise, right? And you've seen the major reports of shootings in synagogues and people being attacked, and you've seen that.
Right.
Recently here in Florida, down near Boca Raton, there were a group of white supremacists who sat outside a synagogue, and they were taking down license plates of every single Jew coming out of services. And they were telling them, we now know where you live. We will come find you. That was here in Florida.
Okay.
There have been Nazi rallies in Orlando, which, you know, is about 40 miles from us, 50
Right.
miles from us.
Right.
And yet, and you do see it on the news, and yet nobody from the state officers are denouncing that, right? So that's a problem. So here's what I know from history. And when I talk to you about this, I will let you know up front that I had an uncle who was a survivor from Auschwitz.
My goodness.
So think about that for a second, right? It
Right.
wasn't that long ago that the Holocaust happened. In Nazi Germany, who, by the way, they took a lot of the way they treated the Jews from the way Americans treated the slaves.
Okay.
So think about that for a minute. But they didn't start with the Jews, right? So when we talk about the Holocaust, there were about 7 million Jews that were executed.
Right.
There were 14 million that were executed.
My
It
goodness.
wasn't all just Jews, right? So
Right.
it was political party opposition.
Right.
It was, you know, the socialists. It was people who had mental or physical handicaps. It was people of other races, right?
Right.
It was the LGBTQ community,
Right.
and it was the Jews. And the Jews were the largest scapegoat, right? They said the downfall of Germany was because of the Jews, because the Jews were taking all the money and blah, 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 blah. Keep in mind, at the time, the economy in Germany was in a decline, right?
Right.
And so it was Hitler who came up with this solution to get it back on track. And that was the Holocaust. That was his solution. And for some part, it did actually work, right? It did help get a stronger economy. Not saying it was a good thing. I'm just saying that
Right.
that was sort of a fact. But the thing they start with is demonizing someone else.
Right.
So in America, we know they've always demonized slaves, Black people, all that, right?
Right.
We also know that they are now going after LGBTQ community, that they are all pedophiles and groomers, which is totally not true. Because when you look at the amount of people that are being charged with pedophilia, and they're mostly white Christian males who attach to churches, right? Southern Baptist Convention just released a list of over 700 pastors that were grooming kids.
My goodness.
Okay.
Wow.
But what they will do is they will demonize the marginalized communities, and then they will start attacking them. They want us out of the country. They don't want us around. They want a Christian national country, right?
Right.
What they're not saying 100% right now is they want a white Christian nation. Not just a Christian nation, but a white Christian nation. So for all these conservative Black pastors that are standing up saying, yeah, we want a Christian nation, at some point, they're going to turn around and say, not you. You're not Christian enough.
Interesting.
So we have to be very careful where we're at. And if you think that the United States has never had a concentration camp, you would be wrong.
Well, I know under Roosevelt, you know, he had the Japanese internment camps in San Francisco and other parts of California.
Not a Japanese internment camp. Yes, we had those.
Hmm.
We had a Nazi concentration camp, Camp Algiers in Alabama.
Hmm.
And so what was happening was they were originally trying to round up Nazi officers,
Okay.
but anti-Semitism was huge in America. And then it's a whole nother story, but it was huge in America at the time. So there were people saying, oh, see that guy over there? Yeah, he's a Nazi. And they were pushing. So a lot of Jews got rounded up and put in Camp Algiers. So if you think it can't happen in America, it has.
Yeah.
It could.
Right.
And when they were getting all these kids, migrants separated at the border and putting them in all these cages, I'm like, that's the first step. Second step is, oh, we can't find their families, so we might as well get rid of them. How will you get rid of them? Well, you know, most of them are sick. We can't really feed them, so we'll just kill them.
Wow.
Now, that may sound extreme. And I always said during that time, I said, look, I hope I'm wrong. But if we had another 4 years, what would have happened?
Interesting.
What could have happened? Right?
Right.
A
So,
lot of those kids are going to grow up without knowing the families they own because they were separated at a young age and nobody knows how to track them back to their families. There are companies trying to do that right now. And they're being successful part of the time, but not all those kids are going to wind up back with their original family.
so what is, all right, so what is the solution to, I guess, then the border crisis now that you brought up Mexico and so forth? And how would that help with anti-Semitism? Because that seems like that's more of a philosophy, more so than, how can I describe that? Because I'm just thinking, because you kind of tied those together. So how would one help the other?
So my belief is we just need to stop looking for division everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. We're all humans and we need to remember that. And, you know, I'll give our president some credit here. I heard him speak the other day, and he mentioned the fact that all men and women are created equal.
Okay.
He was talking at Selma,
Right.
Alabama, when he was doing this. And he was explaining that those words today mean every citizen in the United States. Because when those words were written, they weren't.
Right.
They didn't include Black men. They didn't include women, right? They only included white landowners.
Right.
To be honest. We need to start realizing that we're all citizens of the United States. We all have a history here. We all have a right to be here, and we need balance in everything, right? You can't be right 100% of the time, and I can't be right 100% of the time. But you know what, Carl? We can have a conversation, and maybe you be right some, and maybe I'll be right some, and that's okay.
Exactly.
We need balance, and so I think the marginalized communities have got to start pulling together because there's more marginalized communities than there are white Christian nationals.
Interesting.
And if we all supported each other, if the Blacks, the Asians, the Muslims, the Jews, the women, the LGBTQ community all pulled together, we could vote out a lot of the people that are creating problems on a political scale, because it is kind of a top-down approach. If you've got this hate at the top, it's going to filter down.
Right.
And we need to get rid of that hate. Nobody can live a happy life hating 100% of the time. You can't. There's no way. If you hate, you're not going to have a happy life.
No, not at all.
If you want to have a happy life, we all need to learn to live together and work together and respect each other. And that's kind of where I think we need to move.
So,
Okay.
what is keeping the hate going in your view? I mean, there has to be a source. I believe is the media to a large degree, because I see a lot of segments that are very divisive, and people are taking that and playing the victim role with a lot of it. Because even some folks that aren't necessarily going through what you're talking about, they feel like they are, even though they're not, because they watch the news and then they hear somebody say, oh, yeah, this affected you and you're not getting anywhere because you are this. How do you change that philosophy within the marginalized group to say that you're not a victim anymore and you can progress, and you have to start tuning out some of the stuff that's coming into your mindset?
Well, and that's a good point, right? The biggest problem with corporate media is that they need ratings, and hate gets ratings. It
Yeah,
does, right? And I think that's because a lot of people in America were sold the American dream, right? You can be anything you want to be. You can make $1 million if that's what you want to do. It's very simple. Anyone can do it.
right.
But that's not really the reality,
No, it's
right? There are people who are making it and people don't.
right,
Sometimes you got to go to a good school and have those right connections, and sometimes you just have to work a little harder. I'm not saying that the way out of poverty is to work harder, because you and I both know people who are poor work their asses off.
oh yeah,
They're just not getting paid. But I think it's that. I think when people look at their lives and they go, this is not what I wanted for my life. And then you've got somebody on a TV screen who's like, well, the reason you're poor is because Mexicans are taking your jobs, or blacks are taking your jobs, or Jews are taking your jobs, or Jews are trying to replace us, or any of that stuff.
right.
And you glam onto that. You're like, yes. And if I can get rid of them, then I'll have a better job. But I got a question. If Mexico is sending us their worst, and they're rapists and they're drug addicts and they're criminals, but you can't get a job because Mexicans are taking our jobs, what does that say for the job you're trying to get if they're only criminals and rapists and murderers and drug addicts?
It's a hell of a point.
And that's the thing. So let's just say you watch corporate media. Okay, I'm not saying you do, you don't, but if you do,
Right.
look at the contradictories in everything they talk about,
Oh, absolutely.
right? How can you be all this and still be stealing all this? What does that say for where you're at? Because they're not saying if you want to be a CEO, they're sending CEOs over here. Right.
Right.
So I think the real problem, Carl, is that it's those of us who are not making a lot of money. Some people are very frustrated. Maybe you and your wife aren't getting along. Maybe you've got 4 or 5 kids and one needs a new pair of shoes and you can't afford how to buy the shoes, and you're just really angry
Right.
because that's what they feed on.
Oh,
They feed
absolutely.
on that hate, that anger,
The
that that
insecurity.
that you as a poor man, you can't support your family, so that you're a loser. And the reason you're a loser is because if you just hated these people, you'll be a winner. The reality is you won't be. The reality is those people at the top are using you to get their hate out so that you can do their dirty work and create more hate.
So really, now this is good. You've I think you uncovered the box that everybody is trying to figure out what the hell is going on. It's not necessarily a red versus blue. It's more of red versus blue versus the elite narrative that's going on, because division sells. I mean, look how much money you make in war. you know, especially if you're a defense contractor. I mean, look at this Ukraine conflict that's going on.
Right. Right now, they're looking to cut all social programs, but they won't touch the defense budget. We're not at war with anyone. Why do we keep increasing our defense budget?
Absolutely.
And our defense budget is more than the next 26 countries. And 25 of those countries are our allies.
Oh, yeah.
Why are we spending so much on that? But you're right. And so you and I lived in the Washington, D.C. area.
Yes.
We know that people on Capitol Hill will have these fights in Congress. And then what do they do afterwards? They all go to dinner together.
Absolutely.
They
I'm
all go
taking
to
some of them
parties.
to their dinners. So yeah.
Right? And the thing is that the more they keep you and I divided, the more they stay in power.
Absolutely.
So we need to get them out of power by stop having this problem, having these fights, having these arguments.
It's almost a uni-party that we're fighting.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Wow. I mean, this is very good, man. So overall, have you directly seen any more or been a part of hate towards you in the past, couple of years?
I'm not going to say in the past couple of years I haven't, but I actually lost a job because I was Jewish.
Did you want to explain what happened?
Sure.
All right.
So I was bench tech, and I had to share all the test equipment. So there was two of us to a bench, right? In between was test equipment. And we worked on electronic wireless microphones and stuff.
All right.
So the guy I was sharing a bench with, and we were assigned seats from the day I walked in. I had to sit in that one spot and I couldn't move. Okay. But the guy next to me hated me from the day I walked in, and I never understood why. And over time, it became apparent, and he never admitted it. But I finally looked at him one day and I said, "John, are you a member of the KKK?" And he looked at me and he laughed and he didn't say another word.
Huh.
I said, okay. So feeling uncomfortable with that, because most of the guys that I work with, right, they're all a bunch of jerks, right?
Right.
They knew this guy and I didn't get along. They knew this guy was overly conservative. They knew I was pretty liberal. So they would start arguments between us and walk away. Remember, I worked for a wireless microphone company. They would hide a microphone between the two of us. They'd go into another room and hear us fighting.
Interesting.
One day, they started this whole fight. It was shortly after Clinton had announced the don't ask, don't tell policy, right, in the military.
Right.
So he says, oh, now you can't sleep on your back in the military. No, sleep on your stomach in the military. Like, what the hell does that mean? Well, you don't know that, you could wake up and, have stuff in your butt.
What?
Right? That was my reaction. So we started fighting, and I'm like, oh, so I suppose you now feel, because they're not asking and don't telling, that they're going to start putting pink drapes in tanks. He goes, yeah, they probably will. So we were having this back and forth. And finally, one of the guys I work with came over to me and said, Jay, I need you to come into the next room. So I did. And that's when I realized there was a microphone between us. He's like, you got to stop. And I'm like, why? He's like, because he's going to grab a screwdriver and stab you with it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I eventually went to management and said, I need a different seat. I can't continue to sit there. I explained to them why. And then shortly after that, they tried to find every reason to have me fired.
So you kind of experience kind of double discrimination, because you weren't black, and then on top of that, you're Jewish. So I guess that's another layer there with the guy. Wow, that's a pretty interesting predicament you was in.
And you just don't know, right?
Yeah,
I was telling you this the other day, growing up, I always thought I was white. Literally, I always thought I was white.
right.
And then there was this black woman that I was very interested in. I wanted to date her. And I was kidding around with her one day and said, "Oh, so would you ever date a white boy?" And she goes, "You're not white." I'm like, "What?" She said, "You're Jewish. You're not white." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that is like the racist thing anyone has ever said to me."
Wow.
But you know what? She's right. I am now what I would call conditionally white, right? I pass as a white guy. People think I'm white. They don't really think I'm Jewish because I don't have long hair and all the other stuff that goes with it. I don't have long beard or huge nose, right? I
Not
mean, I have a
that
big
that's
nose, but not that big.
uh-huh.
So I am white as long as they are looking at other marginalized communities. But sooner or later, they're going to say, "Nope, you're a Jew. You're not white. You don't believe in Christ. You need to go." And that's the way it worked in Nazi Germany. The funny thing about Nazi Germany, they wanted the Aryan race, right? Blonde hair, blue eyes,
Right,
Christian, right?
right.
What was Hitler? He wasn't blonde hair. He didn't have blue eyes.
Yeah, he had a Jewish ancestry too. So
His grandmother,
yeah.
his grandmother was Jewish. So, it's funny, but that's the way, that is where we are headed if we don't stop this hate. And the only thing that's going to stop this hate is that we just really have to learn to work together. We have to learn to find our commonalities. One of the things after 9/11, everyone was like, "Oh, the Quran, it's so violent, blah, 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 blah." Okay. So Muslims are bad because it's very violent. Have you ever read the Bible? Do you know all the violent things that are in the Bible?
Absolutely.
Like stoning your brother and,
Exactly. An eye for an eye. Do I need to go further than that?
so what I recently found out is the Quran is based on the Bible. They acknowledge Jesus Christ was a prophet. They don't see him as the savior, but they acknowledge him as a prophet.
Right.
They actually believe both the Torah, the New Testament, as well as what they incorporated in the Quran. So they're no more violent. And I've known a lot of Muslim people, and they were all very peaceful people.
Yeah.
The extremists, yeah, we got to worry about the extremists, but we have to worry about extreme Christians. We have to worry about extreme Jews. We have to worry about everyone who's extremist. Extremists are always bad. And there are extremist Jews.
Right.
And I'm scared of them. Just like I'm scared of extreme Christians, extreme Muslims, any extremists, they want to harm people. And that's not good.
Yeah, they either want to harm or do away with, and see, it's weird because it's such a minority of folks that fall into that category of being extreme, but they dominate a lot of the insecurity that goes across the world, I believe. It's just amazing because if you talk to people one-on-one, because it's funny when you brought up 9/11, I can't think of another time where everybody really started coming together, and it only lasted for like 3 weeks. Everybody was so nice, everybody was so kind. They didn't cut you off on the road or nothing like that. It was like everybody was totally different after 9/11, because I always thought there was three events in my lifetime that brought people together to a certain degree. The JFK assassination, 9/11, and to a much lesser extent, Hurricane Katrina. But then the three most divisive events that I could think of was the Vietnam War, the war in Iraq, and COVID. Those three things have separated us faster than anything else that I could think of, especially the COVID. I mean, we almost basically went into the second civil war over that, you know?
Right. And but with COVID, we had something we didn't have with the other two. And what we had was an internet and a lot of misinformation.
Right. I agree.
And a lot of that had our reliance on the internet has been a problem, right? Because, you know, even Abraham Lincoln said, you can believe everything on the internet. Right?
That's a good one.
So,
or George Costanza, it's not a lie until you believe it. So,
well, and that's the thing with a lot of these memes is that if they align with what you're thinking, then you believe it. And if it doesn't align with your thinking, then you just discard it. You go, oh, whatever.
Nobody's willing to challenge and have the debate anymore. It's like they want to stay in their safe space and they only agree with you if you follow their insecure patterns and lack of accountability. That's what I see.
But this is also part of their indoctrination, right? So we've had Christian groups who have funded billions and billions of dollars to take over our government, right?
Right.
And it's going on daily. It's been happening for years and it's getting worse. And they're being more and more open about it, about how they just want a Christian nation. So they're seeing these and they're saying, okay, well, this makes sense. And this is why I need to hate Carl or I need to hate Jay, because they are trying to take over our jobs or take over our life or replace us. And we won't do any better unless we get rid of them. So it all kind of goes back full circle.
Right.
And it comes down to, well, we all need to be accountable. And if we started publicly holding people accountable, maybe in our own personal lives, we'd want to be more accountable. And so we would start critical thinking, right? Everyone will tell you Google's free. And you can't believe everything you read on Google because, you know, Google will give you bad websites as well as good websites. But you have to know where to find the actual facts and find those facts and then figure out what the real story is, right? Years ago, we used to have a law, the Fairness Doctrine, which regulated news bureaus, and they had to give balanced news.
Yes.
And when that expired, and Congress said, nope, we're not doing that anymore. What happened? Fox News was created. A lot of conservative media got created. And I'm not saying conservative is bad and liberal is not. I'm just saying all these extremist medias became a thing. And they no longer had to have accountability. Yeah. They didn't have to show the other side. They could just give their feelings. And their feelings is you are wrong. And their feelings are you suck. And their feelings are you are stopping me from having my best life.
There you go.
And we need to bring back that fairness doctrine to make news bureaus more accountable, right? Everything that's coming out about Fox News right now and lying about the stolen election and how they were, you know, thought Trump was crazy and all of Trump's lawyers were crazy. But yet they were putting that news out there anyways, because they wanted ratings. And it always comes down to ratings. And I saw this years and years ago when 60 Minutes ran a softball story on Ford Motor Company.
Okay.
And Ford, I think it was something to do with the Escape rolling over or something like that.
I remember that, yeah.
But they had this very softball interview with Ford. And everyone was like, well, why is that? Why? Because Ford was a major advertiser. And if it ran a real hate story for the truth about Ford, they would lose that advertising revenue.
Right.
And that was back in like the 80s. And it's gotten worse over time.
87, something like that. I remember.
Yeah. And it just got worse and worse over time. And they are looking for ratings, and news bureaus should not be looking for ratings. Okay. Maybe we don't need 24-hour news stations. Maybe we need to go back to, we only get it, a few hours a day.
Yeah, because they didn't have time for all of the fluff pieces and all of the fact tabloid stuff that they put out there now, because they need to fill up the airwaves.
And it really does go back further than that. I remember there was also a 60 Minutes interview. Remember Mike Wallace?
Yes.
So he was doing an interview, had to do something about the Middle East, Israel, Palestine relations. And he actually paid some kids to throw rocks at other kids.
Get out of
He
here.
wanted it for the shot. No, it was actually a story that came out later.
Yeah. I'm not saying I don't believe you, but I'm just like, wow,
But that's the thing, right? They're doing it for ratings. So we need to find news bureaus that are not doing it for ratings, or we need to double check what they're telling us, right? And I think there are some mainstream medias that get it pretty right most of the time, not all the time.
And I know your time is very valuable, but I want to get back to that COVID point to finish off, because you said something that made me think about that. I think with COVID, the debate the doctors had and the medical community should have never been public right then and there, because that's where you started having people take a political side on it, because you heard Fauci say something on one end, then you heard other doctors that didn't agree with him say something else on the other end, and it became public. And they would go to the microphones and say, well, because of the gain of function research and because of this and because of that. And then he'd say, well, that has nothing to do with anything. That's when I started seeing it get politicized about COVID. And at that point, I really don't think, both Dems and Republicans, they were standing back because nobody knew what the hell was going on, as in terms of COVID. And once the doctors started getting into the debates on a public square, that's when I think everything started getting politicized. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I don't think you're wrong on that at all. What I do remember about that, though, see, we live in a society where everything has to be 100%. And if it's not 100%, then it's totally wrong. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
Fauci first said, no, we don't need to wear masks. And then he got a little more data and he goes, no, we need to wear masks. Right.
Right.
He was following the data. Right. Other people were not necessarily following the data. And I'm not sure where they were getting their information from. Doesn't matter. Then the vaccine came out and they said, well, it's only about 50, 80% effective, whatever. People were like, well, I shouldn't get COVID if I got the vaccine. And you can't do that because no vaccine is ever 100%.
Correct.
But you're like, well, if it's not 100%, forget it, it's wrong.
Yeah.
And you can't do. You can't do it.
Right.
So that's it. And we need to get out of this mindset that it's either this or it's that, because it's never that. It's always somewhere in the middle. But when you have extremists running the country, it's this or it's that. It's black, it's white. It's never gray.
It's never fluid. Yeah.
And again, if we all banded together, we would have a better chance than being divided, right? Divided we stand, divided we fall.
Yep.
Right?
I hear you.
So
wow, this is a very good episode. I'm glad you took the time.
Sure. Let's do it again.
We will do this again. I appreciate it. I'm sure the audience appreciates it. And I'm gonna have to do some research on some of the stuff that we're gonna do it. So
okay.
All right. Well, until next time, we'll do this again. I appreciate it, Jay.
Thanks, Carl. It's good seeing you.
Good seeing you.